Rain traced silver veins down the black windows of the ferry as Evelyn Hart stared into the misted horizon. The sea seemed to mourn with her, restless, gray, and endless. She hadn't seen the Hart estate in over a decade, not since her mother's funeral. Back then, her name was barely spoken. Now it was whispered again, in the ink of a dead man's letter, summoning her home. Her grandfather's will was to be read tonight. As the shoreline of Hart's Point emerged through the fog, the mansion loomed like a memory she'd tried to bury. Slate roofs, iron balconies, and secrets sealed behind stained glass. She could almost hear the faint echo of her grandfather's voice. Blood may forget, Evelyn, but truth never does. The storm brewed heavier, as if the sky itself knew that by midnight, silence would no longer protect anyone. The mansion doors opened with a hollow groan, releasing the scent of polished wood and ghosts. Evelyn stepped into the grand foyer, marble floors reflecting the chandeliers flicker like a trembling heartbeat. Every portrait lining the hall stared down at her, the eyes of ancestors who'd once ruled this house. Footsteps echoed from the landing. Margaret Hart appeared first, wrapped in a crimson silk robe, her lips pursed in disbelief. "You came," she murmured, as if Evelyn's presence disturbed the architecture itself. Behind her, Thomas Hart descended the stairs in his tailored gray suit, voice slick with restrained disdain. "Didn't think you'd care to return," he said, his smile cutting like polished glass. Evelyn simply set her suitcase down, her voice calm but steady. "I didn't come for you." The rain outside deepened its percussion against the windows, punctuating the truth neither dared to face. She was not here to visit. She was here to reclaim what was taken. Dinner was silent, except for the clinking of silver on porcelain. Evelyn sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, the seat her grandfather once occupied. The others filled the air with polite conversation sharpened by hidden blades. Margaret's laughter was brittle. Thomas's questions rehearsed traps. The portraits behind them seemed to listen. Evelyn answered little, her gaze drawn to the empty chair at the head of the table, where Richard Hart, when he died, used to command the room with a single look. She could almost feel his presence in the way the candles flickered when someone lied. When the servant poured wine, Evelyn noticed Daniel Voss, the family lawyer, watching her quietly from the corner. His expression carried something unspoken, warning or reassurance. She couldn't tell. Later, in the corridor lined with mirrors, Evelyn paused. Her reflection fractured across gilded frames, multiple versions of herself staring back, each one shaped by the family's indifference. In the glass nearest the study door, she saw her mother's reflection for a heartbeat, or thought she did. A memory, age 35, soft-eyed and faded. A gust from the old vents stirred the curtains, and she inhaled the scent of cedar and old perfume. From behind the study door came muffled voices, Margaret and Thomas arguing, their words venom disguised as grief. Evelyn turned away, every step echoing a decade of exile. In that house, she had always been seen yet never noticed. But tonight, she would not remain invisible. When midnight came, the storm's fury met the sea in full roar. Evelyn stood at her window, watching lightning carve the cliffs. She unsealed her grandfather's envelope at last. Inside lay not only the will's invitation, but a second folded note, handwritten and brittle with age. The ink bled at the edges, but the message was unmistakable. "You are the only one who ever looked me in the eyes and told the truth. What they stole, you will reclaim. But beware, the house remembers." Her breath caught as thunder cracked overhead. Somewhere below, a door slammed open, and voices rose in the foyer again. Evelyn pressed the note to her chest, whispering, "I'm home, grandfather." For the first time in years, the house seemed to listen. Morning rose muted and gray over Hart's Point. The storm had passed, leaving the world drenched and trembling. In the drawing room, a long table was prepared with papers, seals, and silver pens. The stage for the reckoning. Richard Hart had planned long before his death. Daniel Voss stood by the window, eyes scanning the restless sea before turning toward the gathering. Margaret, perched elegantly at the edge of a velvet chair, her composure lacquered and cold. Thomas poured himself brandy despite the early hour, his movements rigid. Evelyn entered last, carrying her grandfather's letter. The air stilled. Daniel nodded gravely and said, "We begin at noon, as per Mr. Hart's written instruction." Outside, gulls cried over the cliffs, their sound sharp as accusation. Daniel began reading the will's preamble, Richard Hart's voice preserved in ink. "To my family, bound by blood but divided by pride." The words rolled like distant thunder. Margaret shifted in her chair. Thomas folded his arms. Each clause named the properties, trusts and shares they expected, each gift laced with subtle reprimand. Evelyn remained silent. Her grandfather's handwriting still burned into her mind. Then Daniel paused, his gaze lifting. "There remains a sealed addendum," he said, setting aside the primary document. "To be read last." The room rippled with unease. Margaret's smile faltered. Thomas's grip tightened on his glass. Evelyn's pulse echoed in her ears. Even dead, her grandfather was still controlling the room. Hours slipped by as the reading continued. The inheritance was generous, but selective. Old grudges were disguised as legacies. Margaret received the summer estate. For her devotion to appearances, Thomas inherited stocks, a lesson in value over vanity. Each phrase dripped with Richard's dry wit and buried judgment. Evelyn received nothing. Not yet. Her name hadn't even been mentioned. She felt the weight of her family's eyes on her, satisfaction thinly veiled behind smirks. When Daniel closed the primary document, Thomas muttered, "Seems some things never change." Evelyn met his gaze evenly. "No," she said softly. "Some things only begin later." After the will reading, Daniel asked Evelyn to remain behind. Margaret and Thomas lingered at the door, pretending disinterest while straining to listen. Daniel's tone lowered. "He left this for you," he said, sliding a small leather-bound journal across the table. The cover bore her initials, E.H., pressed in gold. "He began writing it after your mother died." Evelyn hesitated, her fingertips grazing the worn leather. "He said you'd know when to open it," Daniel added quietly. From the hallway, Margaret's voice cut in, sharp and mocking. "How touching. The favorite grandchild gets her bedtime story." Evelyn turned to her, her voice steady as stone. "No, Margaret. I think this one's yours, too. You just won't like the ending." That night, Evelyn sat alone in her grandfather's old study. The journal opened before her. Each entry was written in his spidery hand. Reflections, regrets, and cryptic mentions of the ledger beneath the floorboards. She turned the pages slowly, her eyes catching on one line underlined twice. "They will destroy what they fear. So let them fear you." A floorboard creaked behind her. Evelyn froze. In the reflection of the desk lamp, she saw Margaret standing in the doorway, half-shadowed, her eyes glinting like glass. "You shouldn't read what doesn't belong to you," Margaret whispered. Evelyn didn't look up. "I think it's time someone finally did." The house held its breath. Outside, the wind scraped against the windows like fingernails on glass. Evelyn sat by the dying fire in the parlor, the journal open in her lap. Richard Hart's handwriting trembled across the yellowed pages, each sentence cutting deeper than the last. "When the truth comes to light, you'll hear their silence before you see their rage." The words seemed to echo through the empty halls. She could feel the weight of generations pressing down, the ghosts of greed whispering between the walls. Upstairs, Margaret and Thomas whispered behind closed doors, their conspiracies fermenting. Daniel paced the corridor, torn between duty and danger. The storm was coming again, not from the sea, but from within these blood-bound walls. Daniel found her later, still reading by firelight. "He knew they'd come after this," he said, eyes scanning the journal. Evelyn looked up, studying him. "Then why leave it to me?" she asked. His silence said everything. "Because you're not afraid of them," he finally answered. She rose, closing the journal gently. "Fear isn't the same as power, Daniel," she murmured, "but it's a start." Outside, thunder rolled again, nearer this time. The house groaned in answer. In that moment, Evelyn realized her grandfather hadn't just left her an inheritance, he'd left her a war to finish. Later, Evelyn climbed the stairs toward her grandfather's locked study, the one room no one was allowed to enter since his death. The corridor creaked under her bare feet. At the door, she noticed fresh scratches on the lock, small but telling. Someone had tried to open it recently. Her hand hesitated before she slid in the brass key Daniel had given her. The lock clicked. Inside, dust danced in the beam of her flashlight. Books lay scattered across the desk, and on the wall hung a map of hearts, point marked with red ink. Beneath the window sat an old chest. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She knelt, brushed the dust away, and found another inscription carved into the lid: "Truth buried, truth bound." Inside the study, the air was colder, as if the room had been waiting. Evelyn pried open the chest, revealing bundles of letters, ledgers, and photographs wrapped in silk. Each envelope bore the names of her family members, written in Richard's distinct script. One by one, she unfolded the papers. Financial records, deeds, and evidence. Documents proving Thomas had siphoned estate funds for years, and Margaret had falsified her mother's medical records for inheritance. Evelyn's hands trembled. In that instant, the house felt alive, as though her grandfather's spirit stirred in the walls, whispering, "They built this empire on lies. Tear it down." As dawn approached, Evelyn stood before the fireplace, the evidence spread out on the table behind her. The mansion's silence grew heavier, as if bracing for the inevitable. Margaret's heels clicked down the hallway before she appeared in the doorway, eyes sharp with suspicion. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked coolly. Evelyn didn't turn. "I was just learning what you call family business." Margaret's smile flickered, brittle. "You think this will save you?" Evelyn turned at last, her gaze steady as steel. "No," she said. "It'll expose you." Outside, the first light of morning bled through the rain clouds, casting the house in gray truth. The will's addendum sat on the table like a dormant weapon. Noon had returned, gray and windless. Everyone gathered once more. Daniel, composed yet tense. Margaret, armed with poise. Thomas, hiding unease behind his habitual arrogance. And Evelyn, holding her grandfather's journal in one hand. Daniel broke the seal. "Richard Hart's final amendment," he announced, voice steady but tight. The first words made Margaret shift in her seat. "To those who profited from my silence." The next line cut deeper. "Your legacy is your confession." The document named every deceit, every theft, every falsified account. Each revelation hit like thunder. When Daniel finished reading, the silence was absolute, except for the clock, ticking like a heartbeat counting down to judgment. Margaret's face fractured into disbelief. "He wouldn't dare," she started, but Daniel interrupted softly. "He dared in every line." Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "This is manipulation," he spat. But Evelyn rose too, placing the journal on the table. "No," she said. "It's evidence." She opened the journal to the marked pages, showing Richard's handwriting, ledgers, annotations, the proof of years of deceit. The sound of paper sliding across the wood was louder than any argument. "He wanted the truth to survive him," Evelyn continued, her tone calm deliberate. And it just did. Margaret's hand trembled. The mask of the Hart dynasty was cracking, piece by brittle piece. Thomas lunged forward, grabbing the journal, but Daniel intercepted him with unexpected force. "Sit down," Daniel said, voice steady as iron. Margaret turned away, whispering to herself, "He planned this? He planned this?" Evelyn's voice cut through. "He did. He wanted you both to see what you made of his name." The air felt electric, each breath sharp. Thomas's bravado collapsed into a single line of fear as Daniel laid another document on the table. A notarized statement signed by Richard, witnessed by Daniel himself. "He left everything," Daniel said, "to the only person who didn't ask for it." The words hung there, immense and final. Margaret's gaze snapped to Evelyn, eyes burning with betrayal. Margaret's control finally broke. "You think he loved you?" she hissed. "You were his guilt made flesh." Her voice trembled with the venom of decades. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Maybe," she said softly, "but he still chose me to clean up what you destroyed." Margaret's breath came shallow, her hand trembling as she reached for her glass. "You have no idea what it means to protect a name," she whispered. Evelyn stepped closer. "I don't have to protect it. I have to free it. For a heartbeat." The room was silent, only the sound of rain beginning again against the glass, washing away the last illusions of dignity. When it was over, Daniel gathered the papers, sealing them again under legal authority. Margaret sat motionless, eyes fixed on the empty fireplace. Thomas muttered curses under his breath, pacing like a man who'd just lost his own reflection. Evelyn stood at the window, the rain turning the world beyond into rippling glass. Her grandfather's words replayed in her mind. "Justice is not revenge. It's the echo that follows truth." She understood now. The inheritance wasn't wealth, but clarity. When she turned back, neither of them looked at her. They couldn't. The silence her name once filled with scorn now held something else entirely. Fear, respect, and reckoning. The next morning, the Hart estate felt hollow, stripped of grandeur, heavy with truth. Margaret refused to come down for breakfast. Thomas spent the early hours making phone calls to lawyers who couldn't undo the dead. Evelyn watched from the veranda as fog rolled in from the sea. Daniel joined her, his voice low. "Thou fight this," he said. Evelyn nodded. "I know." Her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But this time, I'm not the one hiding." The waves below crashed with the force of something ancient, reclaiming itself. Inside the house, raised voices erupted. Margaret's fury, Thomas's desperation. The Hart name had been unmasked, and denial was all they had left to wear. Margaret descended the staircase mid-morning, fury polished into elegance. "You think this is over?" she hissed, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. "A dead man's words don't dictate my life." Evelyn met her at the base of the stairs, expression unreadable. "Then live by your own, Aunt Margaret," she replied, "and see who believes them." Thomas stormed in from the study, papers in hand. The assets were never his to give. He shouted. Daniel stepped between them, calm but firm. "You'd best reconsider your tone," he said, "especially in front of witnesses." Margaret's hand trembled as she pointed at Evelyn. "He's turned you into him." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what you're afraid of." By afternoon, the house had become a battlefield of whispered alliances. Margaret called her lawyer. Thomas made threats of contesting the will. Evelyn moved through the corridors like a ghost of purpose, each step measured. In her grandfather's study, she opened the desk drawer and found a single unsealed envelope addressed to her. Inside was a note in Richard's familiar hand. "They will destroy themselves. All you must do is stand." Evelyn folded the letter and tucked it into her coat. She understood. Revenge wasn't loud. It was patient, deliberate, inevitable. and it had already begun. That evening, Margaret and Thomas gathered in the parlor, whispering over decanters of brandy. "We'll claim forgery," Thomas said, voice low. He was old, confused. Margaret shook her head, her voice trembling beneath anger. "And what if the records prove otherwise?" Silence. Outside, thunder murmured. Evelyn entered without announcement. Virgins freezing the air. "Forgery," she said, her voice calm. "He kept your signatures in the safe. Every falsified document you ever signed. Their faces drained of color. He didn't leave you a fortune." Evelyn continued, stepping closer. "He left you the truth, and I have both." That night, Evelyn walked alone through the mansion's dark halls. The portraits seemed quieter now, their painted eyes no longer judging but watching in awe. The storm had moved inland, leaving only a slow drizzle that tapped gently against the glass. She stopped at her grandfather's chair in the library, the air thick with memory. "It's done," she whispered. "They'll destroy themselves without my help." She rested her hand on the armrest where he once sat, the wood worn smooth. For the first time, she didn't feel like an intruder in the heart name. She felt like its reckoning. Outside, dawn's first pale light crept across the horizon. Not forgiveness, but closure. By dawn, the house was no longer just a home. It was evidence. Daniel returned with sealed folders, notarized files, and copies of Richard Hart's final investigations. He anticipated every argument. He told Evelyn, his tone quiet but edged with awe. In the dining room, Margaret and Thomas sat like prisoners awaiting sentence. Evelyn spread the documents across the table. Property deeds, forged medical files, and transfer receipts. Every signature matched. Margaret's lips parted as she realized what was in front of her, the irrefutable truth. "He was always watching," Evelyn said softly, her voice steady. "And now everyone else will be, too." The words carried no malice, only the weight of justice, finally speaking. Margaret's denial cracked first. "You don't understand what he made us do," she said, her voice trembling. Evelyn didn't look up. "You made choices," she replied, "and you buried them under his name." Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "We built this family," he roared. Evelyn met his fury with calm. "No," she said quietly. "You built your comfort." He built the truth. Daniel placed a final folder before them. Bank statements cross-referenced to Thomas's signature. "It's over," he said. Margaret pressed her hand to her temple, whispering, "What will people say?" Evelyn's eyes softened with something like pity. "They'll say the truth finally came home." The sound of a car engine echoed through the courtyard. Outside, 2 black sedans arrived, auditors and legal representatives summoned by Daniel per Richard's final instructions. Margaret rose, her composure gone, whispering, "You brought outsiders into this house." Evelyn looked at her calmly. "No, grandfather did." Thomas stepped back, as if the walls themselves were closing in. "You'd ruin us," he said, his voice cracking. "You already did," Evelyn replied. As the front doors opened, rain spilled in from the overcast sky. The mansion, once a fortress of secrecy, was now flooded with light, paper, and consequence. The investigation was swift. Documents confirmed, accounts frozen. Margaret and Thomas sat in the parlor as officials recorded statements, their empire dissolving in polite legal tones. Daniel's calm professionalism masked quiet satisfaction. Evelyn stood by the fireplace, watching without triumph. Justice didn't roar, it whispered. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Truth moves slowly, but it never stops. When the officials left, Margaret turned to her niece, eyes hollow. "You think this brings you peace?" Evelyn's voice was soft but final. "It brings balance." The storm outside began to break, sunlight piercing through the clouds like absolution without forgiveness. That evening, silence returned to the mansion. Not oppressive this time, but earned. Evelyn walked the length of the corridor, stopping by her grandfather's portrait. His painted eyes, once cold and stern, now seemed almost alive in the dusk light. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Behind her, Daniel appeared, his expression gentler than she'd ever seen. "It's done," he said. Evelyn nodded. "No," she replied softly. "It's only beginning." She turned toward the window, where the last trace of sunlight faded into the sea. The old house creaked, settling into honesty at last. The ghosts were quieter now. Not gone, but finally at rest. A week later, the sea was calm again. The storm had taken the last of autumn's color, leaving the cliffs washed in silver and silence. Evelyn stood outside the mansion with a suitcase at her side. The Hart estate no longer looked menacing, just old, tired, human. Daniel walked beside her, his voice low. "What will you do now?" She smiled faintly. "The kind that carries both peace and pain." "Live," she said, "something this house forgot how to do." From the window above, Margaret watched, not with hatred now, but with hollow resignation. The wind carried the sound of the sea over the stone steps, whispering her grandfather's final words in her mind. The quiet ones remember the loudest. Inside, the halls were empty. Evelyn took one last walk through them. Every portrait, every doorway, every echo of the life that once belonged to others. She paused at the piano in the parlor, brushing dust from the keys. The note she played was soft, haunting. A lullaby her mother, age when she passed, used to hum. The sound lingered through the house like forgiveness. She imagined her grandfather sitting in his study, listening from somewhere beyond, proud not of vengeance, but of truth restored. The melody faded, leaving only quiet, not the suffocating kind, but the kind that waits for light. Daniel met her at the gates, holding the final signed document, the estate's transfer. "It's officially yours," he said. Evelyn glanced up at the crest on the gate, the family emblem rusted and fractured. "No," she said quietly. "It belongs to the truth now." She signed her name with calm certainty. "Sell it," she added. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "And you?" She smiled slightly. "I'll find somewhere the walls don't listen." Behind her, the gates creaked open. Not a sound of exile this time, but release. On her way down the coastal road, Evelyn turned one last time. The mansion stood distant and small now, swallowed by fog and history. She could almost see her grandfather at the window, not as the imposing patriarch of her childhood, but as a man finally at rest, the echo of all that had been said, and left unsaid, drifted through the sea air. She whispered a final goodbye, not to the house, not to the family, but to the silence that once defined her. As the car disappeared beyond the bend, the tide below crashed against the cliffs, erasing footprints from the path that led home. Night fell over Hart's Point once more, but it was different now. The mansion, empty and still, breathed without pretense. Inside, the last flicker of firelight faded in the hearth, illuminating the journal resting on the table. The final page fluttered in the draft from an open window, revealing Richard Hart's last line, written in shaky ink but steady conviction. "The truth belongs to the one brave enough to face it." The page stilled. Outside, the wind carried the echo of Evelyn's footsteps down the coast, merging with the sea's eternal rhythm. The story had ended, but the truth, his and hers, would keep speaking long after the voices were gone.